Layer 9. We are 3.5 hours in. We are storming on to Layer 9, and we're just gonna go until I'm done. So yeah, good old magic. Oh, this is nonsense. Okay, cleanup step loops. Yeah, fun ones. Normally, no player receives priority during the cleanup step, but it can happen if anything triggers at that point, or if a state-based action is performed. So if that happens, after the cleanup step, there's an additional cleanup step, and it just keeps happening. So the example here is Gitrog Monster and Dakmor Salvage. So Dakmor Salvage is a land with dredge. If you have a full hand, if you have more than 7 cards in your hand, and you discard Dakmor Salvage in your cleanup step, that triggers Gitrog Monster, which causes you to draw a card, which means that you can dredge by milling 2 Dakmor Salvage to your hand, and then you have a cleanup step. But then you have too many cards in hand, so you have to discard, and you can discard Dakmor Salvage out of your hand, which means that you can then Gitrog Monster triggers. I mean, it is a basic Gitrog combo. You can do it at any point, but during your cleanup step is essentially the quintessential way of describing a cleanup step loop. So yeah, apparently quite a powerful combo in Gitrog Monster. Wishes and Mindslaver. So I think we mentioned this slightly higher up on the layers thing. Yeah, there's a ruling that says if you control a player, it doesn't allow you to look at their sideboard. If you have a wish that says choose a card from outside the game, you can't have a player choose any card. There is no sideboard for them to choose a card from. So if you Mindslaver somebody and force them to cast a wish, it doesn't do anything. So yeah, bit of a weird one, that one. It's to do with things like there's essentially there are limits to what you can actually do when you Mindslavering somebody, and the scope of what information is actually available to a player at that point, and the sideboard is just completely outside of that. So yeah, but a bit of a weird one. So if you it's not very relevant in things like Commander where there are no sideboards, but obviously there are some other formats where this might be relevant one day. So Mage of Zhalfir. So Teferi, Mage of Zhalfir, and Dryad Arbor. Dryad Arbor is a land creature. The text for Flash says you can play the card at instant speed. So you are allowed to play your Dryad Arbor so you're allowed to play your land at any time you have priority at instant speed, but still only during your turn. Despite the fact it has Flash, you can't play it during somebody else's turn. Because that is just a big fat no. You can never play a land during another player's turn. That one seems a little bit obvious for it seems a little bit obvious for the layer. But yeah, giving lands Flash seems like fun. So linked abilities. Oh, the bane of everybody who finds a Quicksilver Elemental or what's his name? Mere Welder. If an object acquires a pair of linked abilities as part of the same effect, they're similarly linked to one another on the object, even though they weren't printed on the object. But they can't be linked to other abilities. So the example here is Quicksilver Elemental gaining both Arcslogger's ability, which is, I think, pace and mana, mill 10 cards. Exile 10 cards. And then Quicksilver Elemental gaining Sister of Stone Death's ability, which allows you to exile and return cards. Only the creature card that you exile and return with one ability, with like the Sister of Stone Death's ability, can be returned to the battlefield. You cannot get cards that you do exile with one ability from a different ability, and it's just it's one of those ones where you learn about it and it's like, oh, but it would be fun if it did work. But then there are very good reasons why it doesn't, because there are very convoluted and evil combos that you could put together. Burning of Xinye versus Darksteel Citadel. Ruling: as Burning of Xinye resolves, first you destroy 4 lands you control, and then the opponent destroys 4 lands they control. That player chooses which of their lands to destroy. So neither of you can choose to destroy a land with indestructible. So that means you can't choose to destroy your Darksteel Citadel as one of the 4 lands. Neither of you can. So the act that you perform isn't choose lands then destroy, it is destroy. Because it can't be destroyed and you can't perform impossible. This is all about impossible action, so you can't perform an impossible action. Burning of Xinye just says no, you can't choose it. You can't destroy that land. It's an impossible thing. Yeah, there's an analogous example to if somebody says if somebody plays an edict effect, so forces you to sacrifice a creature, you can't sacrifice something that's equipped with an assault suit and then just not do it. You have to sacrifice something that you're able to do so. Graveyard order matters. Old formats are fun. So in formats involving only cards from Urza's Saga and later, players may change the order of their graveyard at any time. Before then, if you're playing with other ones, if you're playing with cards, but mostly from like legacy formats like Legacy and Vintage, players you're able to change the order of the graveyard. You're not able to change the order of the graveyard because there are cards that care about things like the top card of the graveyard. So yeah, 404.2 says generally normally you can't change the order, but there are tournament sanctioned rules that say you are allowed to do so. Interesting question about like if the rule only applies during sanctioned tournaments, what about unsanctioned tournaments? But I guess it doesn't really matter. So the Ozolith's text is wrong. Good. The Ozolith's text is wrong. It doesn't move counters, or rather, it doesn't put counters onto the Ozolith when a creature dies. It doesn't move them off the creature when the creature dies. It causes you to put an equal number of counters of each kind that was on that creature onto the Ozolith. So if you somehow somehow have a copy of the Ozolith that isn't legendary, then each one will receive the same number and kinds of counters that were on the battlefield, on the creature that left the battlefield. So you can basically duplicate counters. And if you have Skullbriar, for example, Skullbriar going to the graveyard or leaving the battlefield, put the counters on Skullbriar onto the Ozolith, but they're also still on Skullbriar. So there's no putting involved. It's just Skullbriar has the counters, and essentially we've got a duplication glitch, and we get multiple counters. Hooray! Skullbriar is weird enough that it shouldn't be a problem anyway. It notably breaks Magic Online, and I have tried to make videos with it in the past and failed miserably. Just because it can't handle some counter types that shouldn't exist on permanence. Only cards in exile. So yeah, that's an exciting one. Sarpadian Empires Vol VII errata. They fixed Sarpadian Empires Vol VII. Obviously, that well-known card, Sarpadian Empires Vol VII, from Time Spiral block. They changed it so that instead of being in italics, it is not in italics. They removed the text formatting of Sarpadian Empires. Don't know why. Probably for some reasons. I did hear some tell of if it is in italics, it kind of might be construed as flavor text or reminder text, and therefore the card doesn't necessarily have a name. But yeah, it's one of the weirder erratas that they've done recently, which is a nice fun one to put in. Another fun one, the +2 Mace from AFR. It doesn't exist. It's not a card. It does not have any official Oracle text. So yeah, it isn't present in Gatherer. And to determine the official card text of a card, you refer to its official Oracle text. And +2 Mace doesn't exist. So yeah, if your opponent plays a +2 Mace in one of your games, just call a judge and ask what the current Oracle text is and watch them implode. So have fun with that. It's a programming thing. It just has no text. It's bizarre. It's almost certainly because they haven't bothered to work out how to unencode the plus for +2. Yeah, it doesn't actually have. I don't think it has a gatherer page. I may be wrong on that, but I don't think there's a literal link for the +2 mace in gatherer. If you can find one, I'd be very interested. Last time I looked, there wasn't one on the official gatherer website, so they may have fixed it since then. Lier and Adventures. Somebody was asking about Lier earlier. Lier and Adventures. So 7.163a, when casting an adventurer card as an adventure, only the alternative characteristics are evaluated to see if it can be cast. So, basically, if you have Lier, you can cast adventures from your graveyard with flashback. That you can actually give the adventures flashback, because due to 7.16.3a, you can put them onto the stack as adventures, and it goes, yeah, that's fine, that's absolutely great. And bonus, if the spell resolves as normal, there are 2 replacement effects working out where to try and put that spell. So you've got both the flashback effect, which is trying to move it to exile, and the adventure effect, which is trying to put it into exile. If you choose the flashback effect, it's going to put it into exile, but you can't then adventure. But choosing adventure means that you can cast it from exile. It's really neat because yes, it does say each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback, and in the graveyard they're not actually instants and sorceries, but it still lets you do it, and that is really weird. And that's one of the nice things I find about these cards. Is just like, this is just weird. So yeah, it's a fun one. Melira, good old Melira. Melira and Inkmoth are like even the same set. Melira makes Inkmoth Nexus lose infect. Just says creatures your components control lose effect. However, if you have an Inkmoth, you can give it infect by activating its ability, so it can have infect. But the other effect of Melira says you can't get poison counters, and creatures you control can't have -1/-1 counters placed on them. So if you're dealt damage, or if a creature you control is dealt damage from an Inkmoth Nexus, the Inkmoth Nexus deals damage. If it's got lifelink, it'll gain that much life, but it has no effect. It will not cause you to lose life. It will not cause your creatures to take any damage. It's just it's as if there's weird stuff happening, like Platinum Empyrean, your life total won't change. Angel's Grace, your life total just won't change. It's a fun little interaction. So nowadays, the archetype of finality, or whatever they were called, the archetypes cycle things that say lose and can't gain an ability would be the templating that we'd use nowadays. Another good one. Oh, this is a fun one. If you've never seen this card, I was going to make a video about it, but I was trying to work out exactly what to say about it. It's just a weird card. Trying to find combos for it there's no like one combo for it. It's just bizarre, basically. X can't be 0. Target spell's controller exiles it with X delay counters on it. At the beginning of each of that player's upkeeps, if that card is exiled, remove a delay counter from it. If the card has no delay counters on it, the player puts it onto the stack as a copy of the original spell. This is the only card in Magic the Gathering that puts something onto the stack, puts a spell onto the stack without casting it, essentially. So everything else casts, like if you copy a spell and you cast the copy, Ertai's Meddling literally just puts the spell as it was onto the stack as a copy of the original spell. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some of the rules, and I'm going to read some of the bits from the notes in the rules information, the rulings essentially for Ertai's Meddling. Some of the fun ones. Let's see. If Ertai's Meddling is used to copy a spell being cast face down due to morph, the spell will create a face-up 2/2 colorless nameless creature with no text. You can't turn it you basically can't turn it face up again. it just creates a face-up 2/2 colorless nameless creature token with no text, because that's what the morph spell originally looked like. What? Yeah, so that's a fun one. If a spell was cast during flashback, it will remember when you put it back on the spell that it was cast with flashback. If you copied an arcane spell with spliced effects onto it, it will remember that you spliced onto it and put those splices back on, but you can't resplice because you're not casting it. Yeah, so it doesn't trigger off casting a spell either, because you're not casting it again. You're just putting it onto the stack. A targeted spell which is delayed through Ertai's Meddling will succeed if the target has phased out and phased back in again. Why? Just why? But yeah, it's exciting. So it's just, it is one of the weirdest cards. I was wondering if there was like a combo with it with Mutate. You can Ertai's Meddling a Mutate. X values. I think it just keeps whatever values you had for X in the first place. It just keeps them essentially. Like I said, it puts it back on the spell, back on the stack as a copy of the original spell, like with all the original choices and stuff. Let's go Brothers Yamazaki. Yeah, here we go. Brothers Yamazaki and Spy Kit. So there's a scenario. You have two Brothers Yamazaki, a Spy Kit, a Leyline of Singularity, and a non-legendary creature like Grizzly Bears. So Spy Kit, you equip the Spy Kit to a brother. Spy Kit basically says equipped creature has the names of all non-legendary creatures. So you now have Brothers Yamazaki with the name Grizzly Bears. So you now control two legendary creatures named Grizzly Bears, one of which has the text, "The legend rule does not apply to creatures named Brothers Yamazaki." So do you have to sacrifice the Grizzly Bears? Do you have to sacrifice one or both of them? Why? What happens? The ruling, the official ruling, the ruling is that you do not have to sacrifice anything. And the reason for that is basically, the question is like, how do you phrase the rule? The legend rule does not apply to creatures named Brothers Yamazaki. And like the inherent logical thing is that when you look at permanents that you're trying to get rid of with the state-based action of like the legend rule, just ignore any that are called Brothers Yamazaki for the purposes of looking at state-based actions based on name. So yeah, it's a bit weird. It's a bit of a weird one. Because in theory you could say, okay, you look at the permanents named Grizzly Bears, and you have two permanents named Grizzly Bears, one of which says, I don't care about I don't care about legend rule, but one of them does care about legend rule. You know, the other Grizzly Bears does care about legend rule. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird edge case, but the ruling is that you don't have to sacrifice anything, so that's good. Goblin Test Pilot. Goblin Test Pilot. This card was created to create problems. It's just a problem thing. It's the most irrelevant. I'm going to read a little bit of blurb. The most irrelevant thing that regularly pops up in name questions like, I control suppression field and activate Goblin Test Pilot, but I don't like the target, so I refuse to tap mana for it. I can't pay the cost, so I rewind the whole ability activation. Can I do that? You can't do that. That's cheating. But then you move on to weird stuff like Kapala, Warden of Waves. You're not trying to do anything shady here. Goblin Test Pilot taps. The target is chosen at random. The target is Kapala. One of the is a merfolk you control with Kapala, or your opponent controls Kapala. You tap Goblin Test Pilot. You target one of their merfolk. What happens if you can't pay the 2? Then you have to roll that back. But then you don't honestly know. You get to a point where if you literally if you can't pay the 2 for Kapala's ability, you get to a point of having to tap Goblin Test Pilot, failing to be able to do that because you literally can't do it. Rewinding the whole ability and then having to tap it again. Maybe this time you'll pick something else that you can hit. So just a bit of a weird card. Doing things at random, not ideal. Especially this kind of ability. So yeah, it's just fun. Cavern of Souls. So there's an assumption here. The judging community has made the assumption that you're always using the second ability of Cavern of Souls unless it's explicit that you use the first ability, or there's no way to cast what you're trying to cast using the second ability. So it's not written anywhere in policy. There's basically a fiat there's a fiat that's been there for years, and there hasn't been nobody's caused a scene about it on camera. So there hasn't been a scenario where somebody has gone, which ability are you using on Cavern of Souls? Or, somebody's cast a creature and then gone, and then their opponents tried to counter and gone, well, you didn't make it clear which ability of Cavern of Souls you were using. So the ruling here is just, you're obviously using the most beneficial one to you at each point. But there's no like official rule on that. It's just a thing that judges have decided to do because it makes sense. Oh yes, another good one. Somebody mentioned this as well. Urza Saga versus Blood Moon. So you might have seen this interaction in Modern recently. If you have a Blood Moon out and there's an Urza Saga, Urza Saga loses its abilities. But what that will do is send Urza Saga to the graveyard. And here's why. So if you have a saga, the saga's final chapter number is the greatest value among chapter abilities it has. So if a saga somehow has no chapter abilities, its final chapter ability is 0. 704.5S says, if the number of lore counters on a saga permanent is greater than or equal to its final chapter number, and it isn't the source of a chapter ability that has triggered but not yet left the stack, that saga's controller sacrifices it. So if it has 0 abilities and the number of lore counters on it is 0 or more, which it always is, then the saga has to be sacrificed. And it goes away. So that is, if you want to kill your opponent's Urza Saga, play Blood Moon. That's the solution there. Limited range of influence. This is just a bit of a weird one that you probably won't even notice for the most point. A player's range of influence is the maximum distance from that player. So if you're playing with a game with a limited range of influence, so things like Emperor have got limited range of influence, you can only see and affect things within that range of influence. It's definitely more of a casual thing. There are like multiplayer variants you can use where, Star, for example, you can have Star with a limited range of influence. It's a quite an interesting one. There's a whole section of it in the comprehensive rules. So if you're interested in limited range of influence, I'd go and check those out. Okay, another one. Wishes in subgames. I've got a video on this, April the 1st last year. Go check it out. Wishes in subgames. You are allowed to, every card in the main game is outside of the game, including the Shahrazad that is currently resolving on the stack. So if you have a wish that you can cast inside the subgame, you are able to go and get Shahrazad from the main game into the current subgame, and then recast Shahrazad inside the subgame to create a new subgame inside a subgame. And at that point, the dream goes deeper. So, if you want, go and check the video out, because I think it's funny, but it also really does explain the subgame mechanics for wishing for something from outside the game. So it's definitely worth checking out. What happens when all the subgames resolve? Then the dream collapses and you have to work out who's losing life at which point. And generally, if you're aiming to do like an infinite loop, you'll win all the subgames, and your opponent will lose a bunch of life essentially. But I think you get to a point where you can't actually kill them due to damage. But yeah, it's banned everywhere. So Charizard is just one of those things where it's like, don't worry about it, it's fine. Aura equipments. So aura equipments are fun. This can be boiled down to whenever something refers to equipped thing, equipped creature or enchanted object or player, all it means is the thing that the aura or equipment is attached to at that point. So if you have an aura that becomes an equipment, that aura, if that aura has an ability that affects the enchanted object, that will affect the equipped object as well. And equipment that become auras do a similar thing. So if you have an equipment that affects equipped creature, it will also affect the object onto which it's enchanted. For the most part, that doesn't really matter, but there are certain abilities. I've got a whole bunch of videos about auras becoming equipment and equipment becoming auras that you should check out to see the details on this. But yeah, essentially it's all about what the thing it is attached to is, essentially. First striking ninjas. So if you have a first striker, if you have a first striker, you can deal damage in the first combat damage step, so for first and double strikers. At that point, you can activate ninjutsu to put an unblocked creature from your hand onto the battlefield and return a creature back. That ninja will also deal combat damage, so you can essentially get a point of attacking with a first striker, dealing damage in your first strike damage step. The creature gets bounced to hand, then you put your ninja in, and the ninja also deals damage in the second combat damage step because it didn't do damage in the first strike combat damage step. So there's a way of basically getting more damage than you might be expecting, and also getting your ninja coming into the battlefield at the same time. It's just a nice little interaction with first strike and ninjutsu. It also, like I said, works for the same thing for double strikers as well. This section intentionally left blank. So before Lorwyn, the rulebook had a couple of sections in it. There was 210 for legal text and 211 for collector number. In Lorwyn, it got collapsed down to 210, information below the text box, and they just didn't want to shuffle a bunch of rules. So they just kept 211 as intentionally blank. It's a solution, I guess. Presumably they didn't want to go around renumbering a whole bunch of renumbering a bunch of rules, but nowadays I think the numbers have been bumped up by some other rules being added, so it's not a problem anymore. But yeah, at the time that was their solution to try not to do as much work. The frisbee ruling. It must flip like a coin and not like a frisbee. Falling star, yes. Flip falling star onto the battlefield from a height of at least 1 foot. Star must turn at least 360 degrees or it has no effect. When it lands, it deals 3 damage to each creature that it touches. Any creatures damaged by falling star that are not destroyed become tapped. Yeah, that's the rule. There is a ruling that says it must flip like a coin and not like a frisbee. So a nice fun one there. And that's, I mean, this is black border, so yeah. Dexterity cards are weird for a thing. All right, Spectra Ward. If you cast Spectra Ward on Light Pause, you get to cast a new aura with the trigger. So Light Pause is the new creature from Neon Genesis Kamigawa? Neon Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. There you go. I always think in my head I've got Neon. Yeah, just no. We'll not say that. Neon Dynasty. So Light Pause says when you cast an aura and targeting Light Pause, you get a trigger that would allow you to attach a new aura from your library onto Light Pause. There is essentially a ruling that says, well, they've asked the rules manager to say what happens with Spectra Ward. Like if I cast Spectra Ward on it, the effect doesn't remove auras, but does that mean that I can put an aura onto the battlefield attached to Spectra Ward? Will it then be removed? The answer is no. It's not going to get removed. So there is a specific rule for this, 702.16n. Some auras give the enchanted creature protection from a quality and say this effect doesn't remove that aura or auras. So you can... I think the rule. I'm going to read through the rulings here. So, assuming you have light pools already enchanted with Spectra, you can attach new auras, attach with any aura removing effects like Auragraph that don't target light pools, attach with any mass returning aura effects, and cast regular cast colorless auras like Eldrazi Conscription. It's not. I don't know if it's a huge deal. It seemed like there was some confusion on the Magic subreddit about it. So I am merely the conduit for the confusion that got put into the iceberg, and I'm trying to relate to you all now. I'm not necessarily super confused myself. I think it just works, right? Spectra Ward is, the effect seems pretty straightforward. I think there's possibly some wording around like doesn't remove auras and the protection element of it, but it works with light pour. It works. So yes, turning things into artifact creatures. Artifact creatures. Some effects state that an object becomes an artifact creature. These effects also allow the object to retain all of its prior card types and subtypes. It's a random exception that normally it would overwrite. If something says it becomes a creature or becomes an artifact. But yeah, it's an exception to the rule that says if it becomes an artifact creature, it retains all the prior types. It's just one of those things that allows it to work the way that Magic used to be, essentially. It's just a random exception. it's fun times. Nothing else works like that. Everything else is explicit. It's just artifact creature. Zoetic Cave versus Blood Moon. Okay, so morph versus humility. So to turn a morph face up, the first thing you do is look at the front face of the card and you see what the morph cost is. And since under humility it would have no morph cost, you can't flip it. Zoetic Cave can be flipped under humility because on the front face of Zoetic Cave is a land, and therefore once it's flipped, humility doesn't apply to it, so it still has its morph cost. However, with Blood Moon, Zoetic Cave doesn't have, loses all of its abilities when it's face up, and therefore you can't unmorph a Zoetic Cavern. So just weirdness. It's mostly just weirdness with how you're not actually using an ability that exists on the permanent itself. It's what the front face that you have to look at and go, ooh, okay, does it actually have an ability that I can use here? So it's just a bit of a weird edge case for that one.